gynhadledd fideo yn unol â rheolau sefydlog Senedd Cymru ac yn gyfystyr y thrafodion y Senedd at ddibenion Deddf Llywodraeth Cymru 2006. Bydd rhai o ddarpariaethau rheol sefydlog 34 yn gymwys ar gyfer y cyfarfod llawn yma heddi. Mae'r rheini wedi nodi ar eich agenda chi. Dwi eisiau atgoffa'r aelodau bod y rheolau sefydlog sy'n ymwneud â threfn yn y cyfarfod llawn yn berthnasol i'r cyfarfod yma. Cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog, felly yw'r eitem gyntaf ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf gan Neil McAvoy.
First Minister, what tests were carried out on the nuclear mud that was dredged from outside Hinkley Point nuclear reactor before being dumped in Welsh waters?
Chemical and radiological testing was carried out in 2009, 2013 and 2017 on marine sediment prior to its disposal at Cardiff grounds.
Okay, thanks, First Minister. In 2018, I went to the High Court with others to stop the dumping of Hinkley's nuclear mud in Welsh waters just outside of Cardiff. You voted for the dumping to go ahead without testing for plutonium. Now your own expert panel has found that any further dumping is against Welsh interests. It's advised that model studies are carried out. UK government report NRPB M173 proves that plutonium alpha radiation leaked for decades without any spike in gamma radiation. So you and Natural Resources were wrong on your reason for not testing for plutonium. You've even been proven wrong about where the mud would end up. Scientists like Professor Barnum of Imperial College and Professor Henshaw of Bristol University are asking that CR39 testing is done so that microplutonium particles can be identified. Will you admit that you were wrong to dump the mud in 2018? And will you please ensure that CR39 testing is carried out so that we will know for sure whether or not there are micro particles of plutonium in that mud? The real question is, will you please ensure that CR39 testing is done? Because plutonium has leaked into that mud for decades. We know that now. Will you test, please?
Well, Llywydd, I established the independent advisory group to explore all aspects of the siting of a nuclear reactor at Hinkley Point as that affects Wales. The group comprises very senior figures from the range of relevant disciplines, and the group published its report on Tuesday of last week. Its conclusions include the need to put in place effective cross-border arrangements to deal with any emergency and the need for remodelling of disposal at the Cardiff grounds as a result of its own detailed consideration of the suitability of the Cardiff grounds as a disposal site within a marine protected area and the wider resilience of the Severn estuary ecosystem. I will ensure that the report is made available to the regulator so that its conclusions can be properly taken into account when considering any application that might lead to the marine sediment being disposed at the Cardiff grounds.
Question 2, David Rees.
Diolch, Llywydd. What action is the Welsh Government taking to support the local economy of Aberrathon?
Thank the member for that question. Llywydd, the Welsh Government continues to support local economies across Wales, including that of Aberrathon, with our packages of funding available to businesses in response to the pandemic, as well as through our Transforming Towns programme.
Well, can I thank the First Minister for that answer? Can I welcome the support given to the thousands of small businesses across Aberrathon during the pandemic, and to ensure that they're able to, as First Minister said, those in business in 2019 can stay in business when we come out of this pandemic. Though there are still some who may need that support a little bit longer because of the sectors they work in, such as Sonalist in my constituency. But most of our small businesses actually depend upon our major employer in Aberrathon, but that's steel. And the need for government to continue its support for steel is critical, particularly in the face of the Tory denial over the future of steel sector in Wales. It appears that cronyism is rife in the Tory party because we see David Cameron lobbying Rishi Sunak for support for an investment company directly, but not for the businesses that the funding or that investment company support. Therefore, can the First Minister give steelworkers in my constituency and in the wider region assurances that this Welsh Labour government will continue to stand up for our steel sector and support the industry as it moves towards decarbonisation in order to build a strong, sustainable steel industry for the future and for generations to come?
Well, I thank David Rees for that supplementary question. Of course, this is an anxious time for steel workers. My colleague Ken Skates attended a meeting of the UK Steel Council, long delayed, but finally meeting on the 5th of March. He also met with Liberty Steel on the 18th of March and raised all these issues again at a quadrilateral meeting involving Bay's Department of the UK Government, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales on the same day. And the point that the Welsh Government always make Llywydd is the strategic significance of a steel industry. You cannot hope to be a modern economy, let alone a manufacturing economy, without having an indigenous steel industry. That is the significance of the work that goes on in the member's own constituency. Now there, the Welsh Government continues directly to support efforts at Port Talbot to secure the sort of decarbonised future for the steel industry that David Rees has long supported. The Steel and Metals Institute at Cardiff University that my predecessor in this job opened in February 2018 focuses on reducing carbon emissions in the steel industry. The Astute Institute, again at Swansea University, using £23 million of European funding, focuses on advanced sustainable manufacturing technologies that can help to secure a sustainable future for the steel industry. Here in Wales, the Welsh Government does everything we can to support that industry directly, but also to make the case only the UK Government can deliver a sector deal of the sort that the steel industry requires, and we make that case to them whenever we have the opportunity.
Susie Davis.
Diolch, Llywydd, and thank you, First Minister, for a sensible reply there rather than a party political broadcast. As you know, the Welsh Conservatives themselves are deeply committed to the future of the steel industry in Wales. There is still a considerable amount of publicly owned land and property in my region, not least in Aberrathon. As the EIS committee has advised that youth unemployment will be set back as a result of COVID, and in light of ongoing concerns about the constituency's anchor employers you've just referred to, how can publicly owned assets be best used to help create investment and jobs which benefit young people in Aberrathon?
Thank the member for that question. The Welsh Government invests considerable sums of money in trying to bring back into beneficial use ground which left to the market would never come forward, often as in the sort of areas that Susie Davis has identified. That is because it is industrial land where contamination has happened in previous years, and which, if you bring the land for sale, then nobody is able to buy it because they can't deal with the sunk costs that would have to be mopped up before the land could become usable. So our Stalled Sites Fund, for example, is designed to carry out that investment on publicly owned land so that it can then be used, for example, for housing with all the jobs that that itself brings forward. And I agree with the member, there is a real challenge for Wales, whichever political parties are involved in it, in making sure that our young people do not bear the brunt of the economic crisis that coronavirus has created, and finding ways in which we can create opportunities for them in education, in employment, in training, so that they come through the pandemic ready to take advantages of job opportunities when the economy recovers, I think is absolutely at the top of the list of challenges that the next Senedd term will need to face.
Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, Aberrathon continues to have one of the lowest employment rates in Wales, with a quarter of the residents economically inactive. Do you accept that your policies, economic policies, have failed the people of Aberrathon and the entire South Wales West region? So what the people in my region need is greater support for domestic businesses, particularly those pursuing green technologies, as well as hoping to attract overseas companies. First Minister, how will your government encourage entrepreneurial spirit in Aberrathon? Thank you.
So there's lots in what the member said in the second half of her contribution with which I can agree. Her analysis is deeply flawed, however. It is one of the most remarkable features of the Welsh economy over the last 20 years, that we moved from having one of the highest proportions of our population economically inactive, and a growing proportion as well in 1999 at the start of devolution, to having reduced that figure to at or occasionally below the UK average. And if you'd said that 20 years ago, that could be achieved, you really would have been thought of as being out on a limb in terms of economic possibilities at that time. So I think her analysis is deeply mistaken, but her positive suggestions for what is needed for the economy of both Aberrathon and the wider economy of South West Wales, I think has lots of sensible things in it. Of course, we want to encourage Indigenous enterprises. We have put money during this pandemic directly into supporting young people in particular who have ideas for self-employment, making sure that they have the mentoring that they need, the support that they need, and some of the startup capital they may need in order to turn those ideas into viable businesses of the future. And while this government has had a particular focus on the foundational economy, those jobs that can't be moved around the globe, we go on helping to bring investment to Wales from elsewhere as well. There's no one answer to the future of the Welsh economy. It needs to draw on a wide range of different ways in which we can support businesses that are here already, support the talents and enthusiasms of young people who have ideas for the jobs of the future, and where opportunities arise, welcome inward investment to Wales as well.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau, arweinydd y Ceidwadwyr Cymreig, Andrew R.T. Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and with your permission, as it's the last Senedd First Minister's questions of this session, I'd like to just reflect for a moment on the tragedy that families have gone through over the COVID crisis that we've just seen before us over the last 12 months, behind us over the last 12 months. The loss of a loved one is incalculable, and the grief that families must be feeling across the whole of Wales is fondly reflected today by all members of the Senedd, but also of all communities across the length and breadth of Wales. But we've also seen huge acts of kindness that have been so inspirational, both community-spirited, kindness and compassion combined, that has carried many people through this crisis. I'd also like to put on record my thanks as leader of the Welsh Conservative Group to the staff of the Commission, who through this session, this 5-year session, have seen us through question times and debates, and also to reflect on the members who aren't with us today that gathered with us in May 2016 to begin this session, who tragically have lost their lives over the last 5 years. First Minister, with the third wave ripping through Europe at the moment, why is it easier to fly from Cardiff to Alicante than it is to drive to Aberystwyth?
Sorry, apologies to the Leader of the Opposition. I just missed, the line just dipped in his very last part of his question to me. You'd just be happy to repeat that very last line.
Yes, First Minister, sorry about that. Why is it easier to fly from Cardiff to Alicante than it is to drive to Aberystwyth at the moment in Wales?
I beg your pardon. Thank you for that. So could I also just echo the first points that Mr. Davis made. We'll have a chance later this afternoon in a statement that I will give to reflect on the extraordinary last 12 months and those who have lost loved ones, but it's a very important day for us to do that. And I wanted as well to take the opportunity, as the Leader of the Opposition did, just to reflect on the cruelty of the last 5 years as far as Senedd members is concerned. We've never experienced a term like it, when we've experienced the loss of members of the Senedd from all parts of the chamber, talented, committed people, and their loss has been very profoundly felt across the chamber. And in the last 5 years, we also lost my own great friend, mentor and successor in this post, Rodri Morgan. And going in as we are to an election, I find it odd every day to think of us having an election here in a devolved Wales without the person who was probably personally the most significant figure in establishing devolution as we have it today. As far as the travel issue is concerned, so with international travel to and from Wales is bound by the same set of rules in Wales as it is across our border, and indeed in Scotland. Some air travel is permitted in very narrow circumstances where the four governments have agreed together that it is necessary for work purposes, education purposes, or where people are returning home elsewhere in the world. At the moment, the stay local arrangements remain necessary in Wales because of the state of the public health emergency. I remain optimistic that, given the current figures that we continue to see in Wales, with the improvements that we are seeing, that by the end of the next week, we may be able to move from stay local to people being able to travel more widely across Wales.
First Minister, it cannot be right with the current third wave going through Europe, as we're seeing tragically, that you can fly from Cardiff more easier than you can travel, as I said, to Aberystwyth. I this morning, for example, was able to purchase a ticket for Thursday to fly out of Cardiff Airport, where I do not believe a quarantine hotel exists or in the airport testing exists. So if you're allowing out of your own airport people to fly to parts of Europe which potentially are hosting the third wave of the virus, why are there no testing facilities at Cardiff Airport, and why indeed is there no quarantine facilities?
Well, there are no quarantine facilities, Llywyd, because no flights to Cardiff Airport go to red list countries. Only people travelling into the United Kingdom from the 30-odd countries on the red list are required to quarantine, and none of them are allowed to enter the United Kingdom via Wales. So there is no case for quarantine facilities at Cardiff Airport, because nobody anywhere in the United Kingdom would be required to quarantine under the circumstances that the member refers to. I am very anxious, as is the Chief Medical Officer, as is Public Health Wales in the statements that were published last week, at the prospects of international travel being allowed from the 17th of May. I share the member's concerns about the third wave on the continent of Europe. I share his concerns of people being able to return to the United Kingdom from places where the virus is in renewed circulation, particularly as there are new variants that are appearing in different parts of the world. I raised this matter with the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in our regular call on Wednesday of last week. I've heard other UK ministers over the weekend taking a slightly more precautionary approach to this than was originally envisaged in the Prime Minister's roadmap for England. I do hope that that will turn out to be true for some of the reasons that the Leader of the Opposition has identified.
I noticed you didn't confirm whether there was testing at the airport. As of this morning, 45 people are currently booked to fly to Cardiff from Alicante on Thursday, and 32 people to fly the other way. Clearly, the informed decision-making that will be going into the roadmap from Westminster is predicated on the report that will be made available on international travel on the 12th of April. So it is remarkable that you were the First Minister it's non-essential shopping on the high street shut, but you're happy to see international travel coming to Cardiff Airport, an airport you control. Can you understand why people feel very frustrated at this prospect, that they see one rule for one sector of the economy and another rule for another sector of the economy, when on your matrix and your COVID recovery plan, it would be safe to open non-essential retail. But as it is, you're prepared to allow people to come into Cardiff Airport where no testing facilities exist, First Minister?
Llywydd, I think people are more sensible than the member gives them credit for. They will understand that the rules that govern international travel out of Wales or into Wales are identical to those everywhere in the rest of the United Kingdom. If the member is critical of them, he can only be equally critical of the position taken by his own government. I looked before we started questions this afternoon, at the list of flights that will be coming into Heathrow this afternoon. Flights from Cairo, flights from many parts of the world where the risks are a good deal greater than any flight coming into Cardiff. If a flight comes into Cardiff, then people who arrive here will be subject to all the rules that are there. That includes a testing regime. It includes people being required to stay at home, in their own homes, for a period after they arrive back, being tested at the start, being tested at the 8-day point. All of that is in place here in Wales. Those are the same rules that happen elsewhere. I've lost count of the number of times, that the member has urged on me that we should follow a four-nation approach to these matters in the United Kingdom. And yet when I follow a four-nation approach identically, where international travel is concerned, he seems to suggest that we should be doing something different here in Wales. We're doing it on a four-nation basis. I'm very glad we're doing it that way. Everything we are doing here in Wales is the same as in England, Scotland, or in Northern Ireland, other than the point the member hadn't grasped, which is that no red list flights are allowed to come into Wales. They are only allowed to land in Scotland and in England.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, every administration should look back on its time in office and ask the question, what should we have done better? When you ask yourself that question, what answer do you give?
Well, I'm sure there are many answers, because I think the member is right that anybody sensible would want to reflect on the experience of the last 5 years. I wish very much that we had persuaded the UK government to strike a different deal with the European Union as we left it. People in Wales voted to leave the European Union. The Welsh government was clear from the beginning that we accepted the fact of that, but we wanted to focus on the form of it. We failed to persuade the UK government of our case, which would have resulted in a far closer economic relationship with our closest and most important market. And right up to the very end, we were unable to persuade the UK government in striking its deal with the European Union to look after the interests of our young people by securing our continued participation in the Erasmus Plus programme, a deficit which I'm very proud to say this Welsh government made good over this weekend, so that young people in Wales will go on having opportunities to work, study and to volunteer abroad, as will young people from the rest of the world be welcome here in Wales.
I must admit, First Minister, Labour's campaign launch recently caused a bit of a double take. When I asked you 4 weeks ago today to commit to giving the real living wage to our care workers, your response then was to pour scorn on what you deem to be unaffordable pledges. Fast forward a month and the real living wage for carers now is a headline policy for you going into the election. I'm personally glad we've persuaded you. I'm just sorry that, like with so many other policies, the North Wales Medical School, the devolution of justice, and the youth job guarantee, it took so long. But in that spirit of belated reconsideration, and at your last possible opportunity in the Senedd before the election, will you now commit to extending free school meals eligibility? You dropped your child poverty target, which we think is a matter of great regret. But will you take this opportunity to promise a hot meal for every child whose family is in receipt of universal credit?
So the fundamental difference between my party's manifesto and his is that ours is credible and his is incredible. When I said to him 4 weeks ago that it was vitally important that any promises that any party makes to the people of Wales can be afforded and delivered, I meant what I said. And the work that my party has put into our pledges guarantees that every one of them can be delivered and can be delivered in a way that is affordable. It does nobody any good, Llywydd, just to pour out promises one after another without any possibility that those promises can actually be delivered in reality, because they all add up. His promises, just in a very conservative assessment of them, amount to well over £2 billion worth of revenue and £6 billion worth of capital that he hasn't got. I will not go into an election promising people things that I know are simply not possible. On free school meals, this government has a very proud record indeed. The first government in the United Kingdom to guarantee free school meals during school holidays during the pandemic, the first government in the United Kingdom to guarantee that that will continue through the whole of the next academic year, the first government in the United Kingdom to make sure that the weekly sum available for free school meals during the pandemic is at a level that avoids the sort of scandalous scenes that we saw in England. Our record is proud, our record is deliverable, and the promises we make will be affordable, credible, and deliverable as well.
Yeah, I know what you said there, First Minister. You were making a conservative assessment of Plaid Cymru's policies, and I think you used your words very advisedly, because I expect you next to be quoting Theresa May and the magic money tree. That's not an election campaign that went very well for her in the end. Our policies will be costed, independently verified by Professor Brian Morgan and Professor Jerry Holtham, an economist that you know very well and you've used as an advisor to the Welsh Government yourself. I don't expect my powers of persuasion to extend to a U-turn by you anytime soon on the question of independence, First Minister, but can I ask you a couple of genuine questions in this final First Minister's questions? In your vision of Home Rule, what powers would you leave at Westminster, given they would be for most of the time still in Tory hands? And finally, and to us, this is the central question. If the Conservatives, as currently predicted, win the next Westminster election, probably the one after that and so on, is there some point at which even you would accept, First Minister, that independence becomes, for Wales, the more progressive option?
Well, so my advice to the member is to cheer up. My goodness, he's written off the next election. He's written the one after that off as well. Really, my party will be there fighting to make sure that the results are different. We're not defeatist in the desperate way he has been there this afternoon. There are many things we could debate as to which matters would be left at a UK level. The key thing for my party is that all those things would be agreed, that we are a voluntary association of 4 nations. That we are. I have quoted Mrs. May for him this afternoon, because that's how she described the United Kingdom in her Edinburgh lecture in the weeks before she ceased to be Prime Minister. So a voluntary association of 4 nations means that we agree the things that we choose to operate at a UK level. It's in our hands, not in the hands of Westminster to determine it. The truth is, Llywydd, the choice at the election is this. The Welsh Conservative Party doesn't believe in Wales. His party doesn't believe in the United Kingdom. My party believes in both.
Cwestiwn 3, Jack Sargent.
Yeah, Llywydd, will the First Minister make a statement on community safety in Elen and Deeside?
Thank Jack Sargent, Llywydd, for that question. On Thursday, last 18th of March, I chaired the latest meeting of the Policing and Partnership Board for Wales. The board reviewed the experience of communities during the pandemic and recommitted Welsh Government and the police to act together to support strong, safe communities across our nation, including the member's constituency.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. You will know that the Tories came to Elen and Deeside and they promised 62 new police officers, specifically in Deeside. They have delivered none, specifically in Deeside. Now, Welsh Labour have funded PCSOs across Elen and Deeside, and the Welsh Tories have now committed to cutting them as well. First Minister, my community has been hit hard by the Tory police cuts. Will you commit to funding even more PCSOs to work with communities to make our streets safer? And will you continue to step in and act where the Prime Minister has failed to do so?
Well, Father, thank Jack Sargent for those very important points, and he's right. The record of the Conservative Party for a decade is of defunding the police across the United Kingdom. Between 2010 and 2018, all years in which the Conservative Party ran the UK government, police numbers in Wales and England dropped by a staggering 21,732 officers. That's nearly 500 fewer police on the streets here in Wales because of the deliberate decisions of the Conservative government. And even if all their current plans were to succeed, as Jack Sargent has said, not a single one of the 62 officers they promised in Elen and Deeside have yet materialised. Even if they were to succeed in full, those numbers would not recover to where policing numbers were before the long Tory years of cutting police budgets and police numbers. I'm very proud of the fact that since 2011, successive Welsh governments have funded 500 police and community support officers. And if this government is returned in May, not only will those 500 officers remain in place, but we'll add to it with another 100 officers so that there are more people on the beat, on the streets in every part of Wales.
Mark Isherwood.
Well, the community safety in Flintshire and across North Wales requires joined-up multi-agency working with communities themselves, and the role of North Wales Police is central to this. With community safety being a devolved matter, Welsh Conservatives would continue to support and fund police community support officer numbers in Wales, working alongside the UK Conservative Government programme to recruit an additional 20,000 police officers in England and Wales by March 2023. How do you therefore propose to ensure partnership working between the Welsh and UK governments on this agenda, where the actual uplift in additional police officers in England and Wales has already reached 6,620 by the 31st of December 2020, including 302 extra officers in Wales and 62 in North Wales, with further increases to follow in the next 2 years, recognising that community safety in North Wales is entirely dependent upon North Wales' established integrated working with their adjacent partner police forces in North West England.
So is the member seriously asking us to congratulate his party because they've managed to restore 1/4 of the cuts in police numbers that they inflicted on Wales and England over the last decade? Is that a serious proposition that he's putting to us this afternoon? When I talk to people who are worried about community safety, they don't talk to me about joined-up agency working. What they ask is, why aren't there more people here on the beat doing the job we want them to do? And the answer is because his government took away nearly 22,000 of those people. And it was the Welsh government that stepped in to restore those 500 police and community support officers that otherwise we would have done without. It's no point at all the Conservative Party in Wales pretending that their party did anything other than to defund the police year after year after year. and that it was this government that stepped in to help keep people safe.
Cwestiwn 4, Carwyn Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd A. Wnaeth Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am waith cydbwyllgor y gweinidogion.
Wel, diolch yn fawr i'r Carwyn Jones am y cwestiwn yna. Just i ddweud, the JMC is a disappointment and one that is of the UK government's making. It hasn't met in plenary forum since 2018, when he last attended on behalf of Wales, and has not been convened once as a forum to craft a four-nation response to the public health crisis.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. Do you share my disappointment that the UK government has buried the publication of the Dunlop Review, which could contribute so much to the intergovernmental machinery we have here in the UK? Does he share with me the need to have a proper system where decisions can be taken across the UK by governments working together? Does he agree with me there needs to be an unbiased dispute resolution process, which we don't have at the moment, and a better way where we can work with our friends in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland? And now I'm aware of the fact this is the last time that I will be speaking in the Senedd. This will not be the last time that I express a view, I'm sure, on this issue. First Minister, do you look forward to a day when the UK has a proper constitution, a proper structure, a time when the rule of law is enshrined in law and not simply a convention, and a time where Wales is a full and equal partner in the governance of the UK?
Well, Llywydd, I think it is absolutely fitting that the last time that the former First Minister takes part in First Minister's questions, that he should revert to a subject on which he has, for a decade, led the debate across the United Kingdom. I absolutely congratulate him on that. We are very much indebted to him for the legacy that we now draw on. He's absolutely right about the Dunlop review. I remember talking to the then Prime Minister, Mrs May, about her reasons for establishing the Dunlop review. I gave evidence to the Dunlop review myself. And you know, I want to pay tribute as well to the contributions that Lord Dunlop made during the passage of the Internal Market Bill through the House of Lords. Had the government been wise enough to take his advice then, we would not be in the desperately difficult position that we are in as a result of that unconstitutional piece of legislation. Prime Minister's had the Dunlop review for well over a year, and yet he refuses to allow it to be published out of Downing Street. And the reason he refuses is, I suspect, because it offers a very different prescription for the future of the United Kingdom. A prescription very much as Carwyn Jones has just outlined, one based on the principles of parity of participation, mutual respect, independence in dispute avoidance and resolution, a constitution that is enshrined and embedded in the law and does not rest in the hands of one of the four nations of the United Kingdom, as well as burying the Dunlop review. This government has now taken over 3 years to complete the intergovernmental review, which was commissioned at the last JMC plenary that Carwyn Jones attended. How is it possible to have confidence that the UK government is genuinely interested in securing a future for the United Kingdom, when at every opportunity it has to do something positive and constructive in that direction, to describe its actions as tardy would be to give it the most generous possible construction on the way in which they behave.
Darren Miller.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, since you took office in December 2018, you've been a constant critic of the UK government. You, in fact, have not just been critical, but you've regularly tried to undermine the UK government's policy, particularly with regard to Brexit. And you recently described the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as being awful. That's not conducive to having a positive working relationship between ministers. Do you accept that in order for the next Welsh Government to have a decent working relationship with the UK Government, people will need to vote Conservative in May.
Well, so a vote for the Conservative Party in May is a vote to hand Wales over to Whitehall, because that is the policy of the UK Conservative government. It is to roll back devolution wherever it can, to put us back in our place, taking on devolved governments instead of working with us. I am critical of the UK government. Of course I am, but I do it because I am a firm believer in the future of the United Kingdom. And yet we have a government at Westminster who every day stokes the fires of nationalism because of the utterly disrespectful way in which it treats other nations of the United Kingdom, because of its failure to discharge the most basic obligations, publishing the Dunlop Review, concluding the Intergovernmental Relations Review. There is so much that can be done. And I think this Welsh Labour government, under the leadership of Carwyn Jones, and in the time that I've been First Minister, has led the way in putting positive and constructive proposals forward as to how the United Kingdom can go on being a success. That is what I want to see. The neglect of that by the UK government, their belief that the way to deal with the United Kingdom is to roll back the history of the last 20 years and to do so in a way that is characterized by aggressive unilateralism on their part, is a recipe for the breakup of the United Kingdom. That's why I'm critical of the UK government, because it is sleepwalking us all into a future in which the very thing I want to see avoided becomes more likely.
Lynn Eagle.
Thank you, Llywydd. First Minister, I'm sure that you and the Council General have raised in the GMC the question of Erasmus+. Given the hugely disappointing decision by the UK government to turn their back on this highly successful programme of learning exchanges, would you agree with me that the Welsh Government's announcement that it is to fund a new reciprocal learning programme for the whole of the next Senedd term is a massive boost for young people in Wales?
Well, so thank Lynn Eagle for that. I very well remember being at a meeting of the JMC on European negotiations when the then Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, David Lidington, asked us to contribute to a list of those European Union organisations to which we would wish to remain in membership after we had left the European Union itself. And membership of Erasmus+ is available to countries far beyond the European Union. And I can assure the member that it was always on the top of the list of things that we argued for, alongside Scotland, alongside Northern Ireland, to make sure that those opportunities remained available to young people here in Wales. And it was an act of straightforward cultural vandalism of the UK government to turn its back, and more importantly, to refuse to offer to young people across the United Kingdom the ongoing opportunities that Erasmus+ would provide. And we've continued to make the case. We've argued and argued that it's not too late for the United Kingdom to take up that opportunity. And it's only the UK government that has refused to do that. And the European Commission is clear, without unanimity amongst the 4 UK nations, they're not able to offer us that opportunity. That's why we made the announcement we did at the weekend, an announcement of which I'm enormously proud, a multi-annual programme that guarantees for the whole of the next Senedd term, our young people will be able to travel abroad, work abroad, study abroad, and that young people from elsewhere in the world will come here to Wales. We get so much more out of that than we put into it. I recently attended on St David's Day an event with SERM students in the United States of America, 4 young people from Wales studying at Harvard, Yale, Chicago and Princeton universities, Ivy League universities, every one of them. They sat there in their rooms with a Welsh flag behind them. They are ambassadors for Wales every single day. and the young people who will come to Wales and the young people who will go from Wales to 50 different countries now as a result of this scheme will be our finest ambassadors. And I couldn't be prouder of the fact that we now have given them those opportunities, and we should all be proud of them as well.
Cwestiwn 5, Angela Burns.
Diolch, Llywydd. Good afternoon, First Minister. What plans does the Welsh Government have to support businesses as lockdown restrictions are eased?
Thank Angela Burns for that question, Llywydd. The decision to provide full year-long rate relief for more than 70,000 Welsh businesses is just one example of the support which the Welsh Government will provide over the next 12 months as we plan to move beyond the pandemic.
Thank you for that, First Minister. As you are very aware, tourism and hospitality sectors are incredibly important in my constituency of Carmarthen West and South Pembrokeshire. And last week I held a virtual roundtable with representatives of the sector, from the most upmarket of hotels to pubs and clubs trying to survive this pandemic. I heard the gratitude that they offered for the UK government's furlough scheme and the Welsh government's many different schemes of financial support, and they are very grateful to both governments for that. However, the other message I heard was a need for clarity on when and how businesses are to be brought out of hibernation. And they raised the challenge of staff. It's the recruitment and training of skilled staff, such as chefs, such as the person who runs the front end of the restaurant, such as the sommeliers and all these other people. You can't just get them off the street. They need to be brought on and trained. And the point they were making is that if they are given very little warning of when lockdowns will stop, then they don't know how long they have to go out there and get them. They've also raised the concerns that actually the resource isn't there because people have moved on. People are looking at other alternative forms of employment where they might be able to have a more secure tenure going forward. So, Minister, can I ask you, First Minister, as my last request of you as a member of this Senedd, to really bear in mind these more fragile sectors where a lot of casual work is required, a lot of casual labour, but where you still need good standards and the time to train the people who can support those businesses, and to give them all of the warning you possibly can as to when they might be able to open up and carry on.
So can I thank Angela Burns for that very constructive question and indeed for the tone with which she always raises questions here on the floor of the Senedd. I don't dissent from the points that she makes at all. It's why we have tried to give the industry as long a lead in time as we can to the reopening of self-contained accommodation, which I still hope will be possible for the Easter period, and have said that in the period beyond the 12th of April, then the start of the opening of outdoor hospitality, which is an intrinsic part of the tourism industry, of course, in southwest Wales, that will be on the table for us to consider at that point, provided the public health circumstances of Wales allows. Llywydd, I don't suppose if I do this, you probably will be able to see the front of this document. I wanted to do it simply because it has such a fantastic picture from the member's own constituency. And this is the document we published last week, Let's Shape the Future, working in partnership to reconstruct a resilient future for the visitor economy in Wales. This is a document drawn up in partnership with the sector itself, and it tries to answer some of the questions that the member has raised with us this afternoon. And the picture there of North Beach and Harbour Beach in Tenby reminds us all of what fantastic natural assets we have here in Wales, which the member has represented here in the Senedd. And we will work alongside the sector for as long as we can to make sure that it can reopen as it did last year, carefully but successfully, and in a way that allowed it to deal with the challenges that the member has identified.
Helen Mary Jones. Helen Mary Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. Apologies, I was just waiting to be unmuted. First Minister will be well aware of the long-term impact of COVID closures on cultural businesses. I'm thinking of some that are partly in public ownership, like the Furnace Theatre in Llanelli, but also some of our flagship institutions like the Millennium Centre. Obviously, this will be a matter ultimately for the next Welsh Government to decide, but does the First Minister agree with me that these cultural businesses will continue to need support well into next year because of the income, next financial year, because of the income that they've already lost? And what plans does he have, should he be part of the next government, to ensure that we don't lose these vital cultural institutions, particularly after all the investment and support that's gone into them already?
Well, thank you, Agents, for that important question as well, Llywydd. She will have seen yesterday the Welsh Government announced £30 million in additional investment in the Cultural Recovery Fund. That's in addition to the £63 million that we've made available in this financial year. That £30 million will help the sector in the first 6 months of the next financial year. And it's there for all the reasons that Helen Mary has identified. The fragility of the sector during coronavirus, when audiences are simply not possible in a safe way. The freelancer nature of that economy, and that £30 million is in addition to the £10 million that we've already made available, the only part of the United Kingdom to have a freelancer fund, and be very important to people who earn their living in the cultural sector, and because of what the cultural sector will mean to us all once this pandemic is behind us, because we will want to make sure that those very important institutions, the joy they give to people after such a difficult time, and we will be there to continue to support them. The 30 million, as I say, designed to support the sector up until September, and then it will be for an incoming government to see what can be done to support it beyond that, as we hope we can restore to the sector more opportunities for it to do what it wants to do, which is to be welcoming people to its venues and earning a living for itself.
Cwestiwn 6, Mick Antonov.
Will the First Minister identify the funding provided by the Welsh Government's annual budget in areas outside its executive responsibilities?
Well, so we stepped in to protect the interests of Welsh people across a range of non-devolved responsibilities, from transport to broadband, from funding PCSOs to supporting EU nationals applying for settled status. The Thomas Commission concluded that 38% of total justice expenditure in Wales, all of that non-devolved responsibilities, now comes from the Welsh Government and Welsh local authorities.
First Minister, it's clear that if the Welsh Conservatives win the Senedd election, that one of the first things they will do is sack 500 police and community support officers in Wales. At their last UK conference, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives made their position completely clear when he said, "Those things that are devolved will be managed by my government, and those things which are not devolved will be managed by Boris." And he went on to say that they will defund what is not devolved. That is their promise, First Minister. Community safety is at the forefront of all our minds at the moment. Policing is not devolved, yet the 500 police and community support officers are paid for by the Welsh Government because a Tory government won't. In Pontypridd, we value their contribution to public safety and the role that they have played during the COVID pandemic, and we see what a difference they make to helping to solve antisocial behaviour. Will you confirm that your continued support and commitment to community safety and the role of our Welsh police and community support officers?
Well, I'm very happy to confirm that if this government is returned to office, those 500 police and community support officers are secure in all parts of Wales, and that we will add to them as well. And as the member said, the approach of the Welsh Conservatives is crystal clear. They laid it out at their conference. If it's not devolved, they won't fund it. That's what the then leader of the party said. I heard Mark Isherwood try to deny that earlier this afternoon, but I'm afraid people in Wales heard what his party said. If it's not devolved, we won't be funding it. Police and crime, police community support officers are not devolved. They are part of the justice system which his government refuses to devolve in any part to Wales. We will fund them here in Wales. It's no use, Llywydd, Conservative members, looking at me like a set of superannuated goldfish on the screen here, a sort of lump and dinosauriate of Welsh politics. This government is clear. We will go on making sure that people in Wales are safe. The Conservative Party not only removed 40% of police and crime officers, they robbed us of 500 police officers as well.
Cwestiwn 7, Jenny Rathbone.
Diolch, Llywyd. What discussions has the Welsh Government had with the UK Government on implementing the recommendations of the Burns report?
Thank Jenny Rathbone for that, Llywydd. The Welsh Government welcomes the interim report of the Sir Peter Hendy Review of Union Connectivity. The report highlights the work of the Burns Commission and its proposals for mainline investment, creating new stations and services to improve connectivity through better public transport.
Last week, we adopted more challenging carbon emission reduction targets for Wales, and it was backed by all members, which was fantastic. So I was disappointed, not to say it's contradictory, that the Welsh Conservatives still plan to fritter £2 billion on a redundant relief road instead of the modern public transport network proposed by the Burns report and endorsed by your Welsh Government. I think the Burns report is a really excellent way forward for delivering the clean air, as well as our obligations on reducing the carbon emissions, not just for my constituents, but for the whole of South East Wales. But as you know, First Minister, the spine of this integrated metro scheme proposed by Burns is better use of the 4 main lines between Cardiff and Newport and beyond. So what discussions has been had with the UK government in light of the interim report from Peter Hendy about taking forward this transformative plan, given that they remain responsible for the mainline rail infrastructure?
Well, I very much echo what Jenny Rathbone said about the calibre of the Burns Commission report. And now, very importantly, the report endorsed in the Sir Peter Hendy Union Connectivity Review, specifically referenced by Sir Peter in the forward to that document, where he says that devolution has been good for transport, and where he specifically refers to the mainline upgrades, which are the spine of that Burns Commission. And indeed, the Sir Peter Hendy review, in the way that Jenny Rathbone just mentioned, places particular emphasis on decarbonisation, the environmental agenda, and the net zero carbon target by 2050. So all of that is good news. What we now need is the UK government to come in behind both the Burns Commission and its own Union Connectivity Review. Now, my colleague Ken Skates met with Baroness Vere, the Minister responsible in the UK government, on the 10th of March to discuss the Union Connectivity interim report. And that was an opportunity to impress on the UK government again the part that they can play in making a reality of the Burns Commission's recommendations, and at the same time to improve connectivity between South Wales, the southwest of England and beyond. I said in an earlier answer to Darren Miller, Llywydd, that I want to see the United Kingdom reinforced. Here is a report by of a group of people that the UK government commissioned. They specifically refer to what the UK government can now do to invest in Wales to create those connections that will sustain the union in the future. Let us hope that they demonstrate that their fondness for the union is not just in asserting the UK government's rights in Wales, but in following through on investments that genuinely would help to make the UK operate as a connected whole.
The very final question to the First Minister in this Senedd term is to be asked by Laura Jones, our newest member. Laura Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, what consideration does the Welsh Government give to improving mental health in Wales when deciding to ease lockdown restrictions?
Well, I thank the member for that very important final question. Llywydd, the past 12 months have been different and challenging for many people in Wales, with consequent impacts on mental health and well-being. As we move out of lockdown, securing positive impacts on mental health is directly considered by the Cabinet at each 3-week review, while always keeping Wales safe.
Thank you. First Minister, the benefits of sport and physical activity to mental health are something that I've talked about a lot in the Chamber since I joined not that long ago. And the link between the two are well known, and I believe will play a pivotal role, in fact, in the recovery stage of this pandemic. On the 1st of February, the Mental Health Minister said fitness facilities and swimming pools were crucial for the nation's health. So you can understand the surprise and anger of physical activity operators across Wales at your decision to push back the reopening of gyms just weeks after the Minister promised that health clubs and leisure centres would be amongst the first businesses to reopen. You have said that you will now revise the decision on 22nd of April, which is welcomed, but more certainty is needed, First Minister, for these companies, these businesses to prepare for reopening. Ironically, so they are COVID safe, as well as obviously preparing grounds, facilities, and that sort of thing. Don't you agree, First Minister, that the benefits of them opening cannot be overlooked?
I certainly don't intend to overlook the benefits of them reopening. Llywydd, I know the member will have welcomed the decision to allow the resumption of children's outdoor activities during the Easter holidays, and of course outdoor gyms are already open here in Wales. The member will be aware of the TAC report that rehearsed the risks that enclosed indoor spaces where people exercise continue to pose during a global pandemic. We hope that the conditions in Wales will be sufficiently improved after the 12th of April that the reopening of gyms and leisure centres can be considered. And I've already said that it will be one of 4 things that will be on the list of things that we will consider for that next 3-week phase. So that is a recognition of both the physical and the mental well-being benefits that come from people being able to use those venues. But it has to be balanced against the risks that are posed, and those risks are real, and they're set out in the TAC report. And I'm afraid that if you're making responsible decisions in government, you cannot afford just to shrug off advice that you don't find appealing or palatable. We will reopen the sector. We'll do it carefully. We'll do it in line with advice. We'll do it as soon as the public health position in Wales makes it safe to do so, but not before.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly, prynawn yma, yw'r datganiad a chyhoeddiad busnes. Dwi'n galw ar y trefnydd